When we think of European royalty at the turn of the 20th century, or indeed the second half of the 19th, we might picture grand balls in opulent palace halls, the clink of champagne glasses, and carefully orchestrated court life. In the popular imagination, it's a romantic swirl of diamante tiaras, midnight waltzes, and polite conversation about politics and alliances. And sure, Austria and the vast Habsburg Empire had its share of pomp and intrigue, but none of that alone explains the quiet torment that followed Elizabeth of Austria throughout her life, the iconic empress often called Sisi. Those who first learn about her are often drawn to the sensational aspects, her legendary beauty rituals, her horse-riding prowess, her famously tiny waist, or the final shocking moment of her assassination. Yet, none of those glimmers of sensational detail quite capture the poignant solitude that enveloped her. To truly see how a lively Bavarian girl became an enigma revered for her glamorous silhouette, but internally bruised by heartbreak, we need to sweep back in time to her earliest days in a more carefree setting, well before she was confined by imperial protocol. Sisi wasn't always destined to be Empress of Austria. Born Elisabeth Amélie Eugénie on Christmas Eve of 1837, she began life as the playful, somewhat shy daughter of Duke Maximilian and Princess Ludovica in the ducal house of Wittelsbach. Her childhood was spent in and around Possenhofen Castle in Bavaria, a place known for its lush meadows and the shimmering waters of Lake Starnberg. Picture her as a young child galloping off on her pony to explore the pathways near the castle, giggling freely at the simplest of pleasures. No rigid schedule dictated her day, and no official ceremonies asked for her presence. These early years shaped her spirit, planting in her a love for the outdoors, a craving for independence, and a near-obsessive aversion to constraint. If Sisi was to bloom like a free forest flower, that flower would soon be uprooted and potted into the grandest greenhouse of them all, Vienna's imperial court. If life had gone according to the original plan drawn up by the family's elders, it would have been Sisi's older sister, Helene, who captured the attention of young Emperor Franz Joseph. Helene was the calm, well-mannered sibling prepared for court life. Sisi, on the other hand, was the spontaneous and sensitive younger sister, sometimes overshadowed by more outgoing siblings. Yet, fate had other ideas. In 1853, it was Sisi who, at age 15, stole the emperor's heart while traveling with her mother and sister to the Austrian resort town of Bad Ischl. Imagine the scene: a glimmering summer soiree, a young Franz Joseph barely able to take his eyes off the spirited Sisi, and the entire court left blinking in surprise as he declared he wouldn't marry anyone else. At that moment, Sisi wasn't a meticulously schooled princess with a taste for protocol and politics. She was just a teenager unprepared for the unimaginable responsibility that would soon weigh down on her small shoulders. In a turn of events that stunned everyone, the emperor's mother, Archduchess Sophie, conceded to her son's wishes, at least outwardly, because to do otherwise might have fractured their relationship. So in 1854, the wedding took place. Vienna's streets burst with pageantry and fireworks, and the aristocracy from all over Europe gathered in their shimmering finery. Sisi traveled down the cathedral aisle with a sense of awe that might have quickly turned to apprehension. Over 1,000 guests attended the wedding in the Augustinian church in Vienna, effectively sealing her life to the empire. After the euphoria of being the emperor's chosen bride died down, she found herself thrust into a role that demanded more than she ever anticipated. She was, for all intents and purposes, a child stepping onto one of Europe's biggest stages. Vienna at that time was the heart of a sprawling Habsburg domain stretching across various nationalities and languages. The city's lavish court structure was a maze of strict etiquette, deeply rooted traditions, and careful political balancing acts. There was an unspoken expectation that the new empress would wholeheartedly embrace ceremonial duties, produce heirs, and embody a near-divine grace. Archduchess Sophie, in particular, wanted a disciplined figure at her son's side, one who would perpetuate the dynasty's grandeur and stability. Yet Sisi's temperament was something entirely different, a flower that thrived in sunlight and open meadows, not under the watchful glare of 1,000 chandeliers. It's little wonder that what was supposed to be a regal fairy tale soon felt more like a refined prison to her. Tensions surfaced quickly. For one, Sisi's mother-in-law took charge of many intimate decisions, right down to how Sisi dressed, or even how she should raise her children. While this might have been considered normal in some European courts, it was a rude awakening for Sisi, who had expected more autonomy after marriage. Every move she made came under scrutiny. Where was she going? Who was she speaking to? Why was she wearing that particular dress? It's said that at times she felt like her life wasn't hers at all. Add to this the fact that her first daughter, Sophie, named after her grandmother, tragically died in early childhood. The sense of guilt and helplessness that followed, especially as critics whispered that the young empress had traveled too much and neglected court responsibilities, left a mark on Sisi's psyche. She withdrew, some said, into her interior world, forging intense emotional connections with only a select few in her circle. Emotional cracks were developing in her life, and the empire's official portrait painters or gossip columns could do little to hide them. As the years rolled on, the empress became known for her striking beauty and the regimen she maintained to preserve it. Her hair especially was the envy of every noble salon in Europe, cascading all the way down her ankles in thick, shining waves. Maintaining it could take several hours each day, and Sisi would endure elaborate treatments, including a concoction of raw eggs and brandy, which might sound extravagant to us now. Yet to her, it was an almost meditative escape from the unending demands of court life. She even had private apartments with mirrored walls to ensure no angle went unchecked. The discipline didn't stop with her hair. She also adhered to rigorous diets, sometimes subsisting on raw milk and fruit juice. Rumors circulated that she fought bouts of severe anxiety or depression by channeling her energy into these stringent rituals. Perhaps the empress discovered that focusing on something as personal and controllable as her body provided a sense of freedom she lacked in every other part of her life. Sisi's real solace, though, lay beyond the gilded gates of the palace. She adored travel with a passion that many in the court found scandalous, or, at the very least, puzzling. She spent considerable time in Hungary, forging a deep bond with the Hungarian people, a connection that would prove vital politically and emotionally. While others in Vienna resented the Hungarians for persistent political tensions, Sisi championed their cause, earning her the affection and admiration of the Hungarian populace. If in Austria she was tolerated but subjected to constant scrutiny, in Hungary she was almost worshipped as a patron of their autonomy and cultural identity. This devotion had a direct impact on the empire's affairs, helping pave the way for the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867, which effectively created the dual monarchy. Yet ironically, as the empress's political influence rose, her personal happiness still felt elusive. She found fleeting contentment riding horses across Hungarian plains, away from the oppressive daily formalities, the cunning glares, and the endless demands of ceremonial life. Besides Hungary, her wanderlust took her as far as the Greek island of Corfu, where she commissioned a palace named the Achillean. dedicated to her admiration of ancient Greek culture. There, she allowed herself to be enthralled by legends of Achilles, mythical warriors, and philosophical musings. Could it be she saw in these storied heroes a reflection of her own struggle against destiny? Some accounts suggest she surrounded herself with classical sculptures of Achilles and other Greek figures, gleaning inspiration from their legendary bravery and sense of pursuit. A statue of the mortally wounded Achilles was said to stand in her gardens, as though it symbolized the vulnerability she felt. Royalty's unstoppable arrow pointed at her most fragile spots. Was she drawing parallels, imagining herself as a wounded figure in a grand tragedy, stepping away from the constraints of a world that refused to fully understand her? Sisi's equestrian pursuits became legendary as well. She was counted among the finest riders in Europe, traversing landscapes in Ireland, England, and beyond. Men who watched her gallop by recognized immediately that this was no mere aristocratic pastime. She was fearless, sometimes recklessly so, taking on hunts and difficult jumps in all sorts of weather. Many in the Austrian court called her unseemly. An empress risking her life on hunts was scandalous, but those who saw her in action might have been struck by the absolute freedom radiating from her eyes during those rides. On horseback, she outran everything: her loneliness, the gossip, the maternal heartbreak, and the suffocating expectations. She was, for those precious moments, simply Elizabeth, forging her own path in the rushing wind. Despite these escapes, her private life grew darker. The greatest tragedy she endured was the death of her only son, Crown Prince Rudolph, in 1889. His demise is historically remembered as the Mayerling Incident. He and his young mistress, Mary Vitsera, were found dead in a hunting lodge under circumstances that remain murky. A probable murder-suicide that shocked the empire to its core. To lose a child is a wound that never heals, and for Sisi, already prone to melancholic spells, it became an emotional crippling. Some reported she locked herself away in her grief, speaking of never being able to smile again. Others say the heartbreak deepened her estrangement from the Austrian court. She resumed her travels soon after, perhaps in an attempt to run from a tragedy she couldn't bear to face. Meanwhile, rumors swirled about who or what was responsible. Did court politics or personal conflicts drive Rudolph to this end? The entire monarchy reeled from the scandal, and Sisi found no comfort. Anxiety and sorrow took firm root in her spirit. Historically, there's been debate about Sisi's mental health. Modern psychologists reading her diaries and letters might diagnose the Empress with conditions like depression or anxiety disorders, problems rarely acknowledged in her day. Her near-obsessive health routines, her restlessness, and her desire for isolation could be interpreted as coping mechanisms, or perhaps a silent cry for help. Yet the official narrative from the palace always tried to present her as a figure of unwavering composure. In an era before thorough understanding of mental well-being, Sisi's turmoil was largely left to rumor, poorly understood even by her contemporaries. And she didn't make it easy for them to empathize. She was known for being elusive, even wearing a veil or a fan to shield her face from strangers when she walked among the public. Some called it vanity. Those who understood her better knew it was more likely a desperate attempt to preserve a tiny fraction of privacy. While most of Vienna's aristocracy accepted lavish parties, political marriages, and duplicity as part of the job, Sisi was distinctly different. She was no champion of typical court life and definitely did not delight in standing as a docile figurehead. Some historians paint a sympathetic picture, a woman longing for a simpler existence, for personal expression, and for the freedom to carve her own path. Others highlight that she could be manipulative or moody, someone who used her fragility and mysterious aura to defy the system while still benefiting from its privileges. The truth, as always, likely sits somewhere in a nuanced middle. She was capable of genuine compassion, and she did push for progressive changes within the empire, especially regarding Hungarian autonomy. Yet she was also known to wield her favoritism to bypass formalities and outmaneuver her mother-in-law's surveillance. Historians are still sorting out how best to categorize an empress who was at times rebellious, deeply sentimental, politically savvy, and heartbreakingly lonely. One rarely mentioned anecdote concerns her visits to a remote location in Upper Austria, near Ischl, where she would sometimes go to meet a local woman reputed to have knowledge of herbal remedies and spiritual matters. Legend has it, this woman, known for her uncanny perceptions, once spoke prophetically about impending tragedies, including the possibility that the House of Habsburg might face dire outcomes. Some local accounts suggest Sisi's guards, or ladies-in-waiting, had trouble dissuading her from making these visits in disguise, as she insisted on walking or riding incognito to the woman's modest dwelling. If true, it underscores the desperation Sisi felt, seeking comfort or insight anywhere she could find it. Whether it was old wives' tales, rumored oracles, or ephemeral glimpses of fate, the Empress was in perpetual search mode, as though she could sense that her life's trajectory wouldn't end in a gentle fade, but in a final, unforgettable shock. That ultimate shock arrived in 1898 when Sisi, traveling incognito in Geneva, was stabbed by an Italian anarchist named Luigi Luciani. She had decided to walk along the lakefront to catch a steamship, wearing little to advertise her regal status. Her assassin, ironically, had intended to kill another royal figure but settled on Elizabeth after discovering her presence in the city. The blow was subtle as she was stabbed with a sharpened file. Accounts say that initially she and her companion, Countess Irma Stare, did not even realize she'd been gravely wounded. She managed to walk a short distance before collapsing, and by the time the seriousness of her injury was discovered, it was too late. She died at age 60, still slender, still vibrant, in many ways, but hopelessly dogged by her ghosts. The empire mourned, but there was also a sense that her restless spirit had finally found release. The Empress, who loathed the spotlight, met her end away from the prying eyes of the Austrian court she had spent so many years avoiding. Controversy still flutters around her even in death. Some hail her as an icon of independence, a woman who covertly carved out power for herself in a rigid system and stood up for the Hungarian cause. Others question her sincerity, suggesting she was a complicated figure, a woman who vacillated between caring deeply for people, especially those she felt were oppressed, and retreating into herself so severely that she neglected essential duties. There are endless debates over whether she was a champion of progressive thought or simply a self-focused aristocrat who fled from responsibilities. The truth might be that she embodied both extremes at different stages of her life. Imperfections and contradictions are part of being human, and Sisi's story is a profound reminder that even those in the highest echelons of society can't escape life's heartbreaks, nor can they easily find harmony between their private selves and their public roles. Looking back, what did her life mean for history? She was, in many ways, the last great star of the Habsburg monarchy before World War I tore apart the old imperial structures of Europe. Her presence symbolized the monarchy's attempts to maintain unity amidst diverse ethnic groups, particularly in the Austrian-Hungarian realm. She championed Hungary, forging personal ties that helped shape the political compromise that stabilized the empire for a few more decades. Yet her personal narrative, full of tragedy, restlessness, and poignant yearning, helped illuminate the emotional cost exacted by such an imposing institution. She remained a cultural icon in Austria and Hungary, representing not just beauty but also an embodiment of longing for freedom and identity. As time passed, the image of the joyful fairy tale princess was replaced by a more accurate, complex portrait of a woman grappling with mental anguish, familial loss, and personal rebellion. Her story has become a cautionary tale for those who think wealth and power protect from sorrow and isolation. More than a century after her death, Sisi lingers in the collective imagination, celebrated in stage musicals, movies, and continuing interest in her personal diaries. Not all dramatizations capture her true essence, but they ensure that people remain fascinated by her paradox. A kind of tragic romance story emerges. The free-spirited Bavarian girl, forced into the gold-caged existence of an empress, using her wealth and status to break the chains where she could, but never able to truly leave them behind. Perhaps that in the end is what makes her so enduringly relevant. Here was a woman who had everything, but also nothing that truly nurtured her. Despite being wreathed in jewels and bowed to by courtiers, she carried sorrow like a permanent companion, a sorrow she tried to outpace on horseback or hide behind lace veils and luxurious gowns. Her shortened life, culminating in that dramatic, almost surreal assassination on the shores of Lake Geneva, offers a final testament to the vulnerability and unpredictability that even an empress cannot escape. No matter how much protocol might dictate daily life, no matter how many bodyguards or courtiers try to protect a royal figure, destiny or sheer chance can intrude in the most horrifying ways. And so, at 60 years old, when perhaps some flicker of peace could have been on the horizon, a single thrust of an assassin's file took away the possibility of any final redemption or comfort in her autumn years. It cements her legacy as a figure eternally locked in youth and sorrow, forever romanticized for what she was and even more for what she could never fully become. What can we take away from Sisi's story? Perhaps an appreciation for the delicate balance between duty and selfhood. Her tragedy underscores how vital it is that we tend to our mental well-being, especially under immense pressure. It teaches us to look beyond the glamorous facade of high society figures, or even modern celebrities, and recognize the beating heart that might be suffering beneath. It warns us that the illusions of power, wealth, and status can be more fragile than we realize. Here was a woman who wore the crown of one of Europe's most formidable dynasties, and yet day by day she felt more cornered, more misunderstood, and ultimately more vulnerable than almost anyone else in her empire. If we take a moment to reflect, we might sense a pang of empathy, even heartbreak, for someone who glided through a royal court so gilded that it threatened to blind us to her suffering. She remains a testament to the paradoxes of monarchy in the modern age, an emblem of intense personal pain hidden behind pomp and protocol. And maybe that's why her image stays with us. The face half-veiled, the delicate waist laced tight in satin and tulle, hiding a woman who felt caged by responsibilities she never truly wanted. In a world that often confuses surface glamour with genuine fulfillment, Sisi's life stands as a stark reminder that no crown can protect a tormented soul. So perhaps we can hold her story in our hearts as we consider in our own worlds how vital it is to nurture freedom, authenticity, and genuine human connection.